This is my foolproof method for producing the shreddiest of Seitan chicken shreds. These shreds have worked for me commercially and personally after spending a long time honing and perfecting the method. And I say method because the shreddy result is, I'd say, 75% to do with the method. You could try many variations of the recipe and produce similar results. For this method of making seitan, you will need the following equipment: a food processor, some sort of steamer, 2 bowls, 1 colander, some foil, and some parchment paper. And I'm using a second-hand generic branded processor bought on eBay for about £40. The important attributes a processor will likely need for this method is at least 2 variable speeds, a metal blade attachment, and ideally a 1000 watts or more engine. You could probably get away with a 750 watts, but you may have to process the dough portions for longer. Whichever processor you use, make sure to treat it with respect and don't overwork it. I don't want to be held responsible for any broken equipment. So first we are going to make the wet mix, which consists of 480 ml or 2 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of white miso paste, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 1 tablespoon of onion powder, half a teaspoon of white pepper, 20 grams of nutritional yeast, 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, and 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. Process this well and then add 70 grams of pea protein isolate, or roughly half a cup. Pulse this to combine and then process until mixed really well. Add 230 grams, or roughly 1.5 cups, of vital wheat gluten. Pulse this gently until the wet and dry mix are fully combined and a singular dough is forming. Don't overwork your food processor during this step. Your dough should look roughly like this, slightly wet and spongy. Don't worry, we're about to change that. Give the dough a quick manual knead to ensure it is well mixed and formed. And then store in a cling film covered bowl to prevent the dough from drying out. Divide the dough into 4 equal portions, roughly 220 to 225 grams each, as we are now going to use the food processor to knead the hell out of them. I am processing each quarter piece for at least 2 minutes, once for 1 minute, then let the processor breathe, then another minute. The texture after the first minute should be a very sticky blob. Process it for another minute. It might start to wrap around the blade piece. As long as some of the dough is still being pummeled by the blades, then you should be fine. If it fully wraps around the blade, you may need to stop the machine to detangle and continue processing. Watch out for your fingers on the blade. The end result should be a slightly taffy-like texture that sticks to your hand but is easy to pull off. Store the processed dough quarters in a colander inside a bowl with a cling film cover to stop it drying out. I use a colander with this dough as if it sits in its own dampness, it can start to get a bit spongy in that area and alter the texture. We now need to repeat this same process for the final 3 pieces. After the first minute, the dough is at the very sticky stage, as you can see. This time I needed to stop during the second minute to detangle the blade, and after the second minute, the dough needed a further 30 seconds as it wasn't quite at the taffy stage yet. You can tell when it's at the correct consistency because you can see the fibres running through the whole dough when stretched. Add the quarter to the rest of the processed dough and recover. If your processor starts to get warm at any point, give it at least a few minutes to rest. When finished, bring the whole dough together and ensure it is combined into one piece. Fold it over on itself once or twice and leave it to sit covered for at least 15 to 20 minutes to allow it to fully recombine. Take the dough and gently stretch it until it's long enough to start twirling. This will start to stretch it into a snake-type shape. The aim is to create an evenly shaped long snake. You can start to twirl it from halfway up the thinner end if it looks uneven. When it starts to get too long to twirl, grab either end of the thickest parts and start to twirl it like a skipping rope to stretch these areas out. One final twirl for good luck, and then set the phallus snake out on a clean work surface. Cut it in half down the middle and set one aside as we start the knotting process. Give a few more twirls if it needs evening out more, but it doesn't matter too much. Coat the dough in an even layer of water. This is to ensure it's slippy enough to tightly knot without the dough sticking to itself. It will also help unravel the cook log later on. Tie a central first knot like so. If the dough sticks to itself, try adding a bit more water. Alternatively, you can try adding a small amount of oil instead. Keep the dough taut as you continue to tie more knots. The remaining dough will start to become thinner. Be a bit more gentle in tying the final few knots, but still make sure the knots aren't loose. If a bit breaks off at the end, it's not a big deal. Tuck the ends in between 2 knots and tightly wrap the dough in parchment. Repeat again with the second half of the snake. It really doesn't have to be perfect, you just need to make sure that the knots are compact and tight. You'll need 2 sheets of roughly 50 to 55 centimeters of foil. Make sure to use foil wide enough to leave roughly a hand's size either side of the dough. Wrap the dough in the foil medium tight. Then use your hands palm up to crease and flatten the sides plush to the dough. Fold and crimp the sides tightly as shown. Fold in any sharp edges of the foil. And leave a finger's width of room between the crimp and the dough so it has room to expand. Repeat the same process on the other side. If the edges become wider than the dough, fold them in. The aim is to keep it as airtight as possible, so be careful not to pierce the foil. Repeat the same process with the second sheet of foil. When the second sheet is wrapped, check that the crimped and flattened side is on the bottom and follow the same method again. Making sure the end of the foil lays tight along the length of the dough. Once both are finished, we will steam them. This method also works really well in a pressure cooker. You don't want the water in the pan to be boiling, so just bring it to a steady simmer. Now check for the open side of the foil and make sure to have it facing downwards so no water can collect in the package when it's cooking. If the package doesn't quite fit, you can fold the edges in a bit. Now we'll leave this to steam for 1 hour and 45 minutes. I found the ideal to be around about 94 to 95 degrees Celsius once brought to temperature. Carefully remove the logs and let them rest and cool down for at least 1 hour. If you didn't pierce the foil at any stage, the packages should be solid from their own internal pressure by the time it is finished cooking. Next we're going to get to the fun part, unraveling the cooked logs. This process is much easier whilst they're still warm, but it can be done cold as well. Gently pull the log apart downwards and you'll notice that creases will split open to reveal the knots. Feel your way around the log, pulling apart each crease to fully unravel the puzzle. It can be easy to snip away a piece or two to get you started. When finished, you should end up with one long piece. If you want, you can cut it into a few pieces before starting to peel off the tough outer skin. This step is optional, but I personally prefer it. To do this, find which way the grain is running and gently pull the skin in this direction. It should pull away fairly cleanly. Once peeled, you can then finally start to shred your seitan. And look at those fibres. Have you seen shreddier shreds than this? Please let me know in the comments section. I will respond to every comment posted. With this method, the grain will follow in the same direction throughout, so it's as easy as pulling apart and using scissors to cut off pieces. You could keep the pieces big, batter them and deep fry them like KFC, or you could cut smaller pieces and marinate them, or coat them in a dry rub, flash fry and add to a curry sauce. This recipe is extremely versatile in both its neutral flavour and chicken-like texture. It takes on flavours really well and the pea protein helps in giving it a firmer bite when cooked. I find that Vital Wheat gluten alone can be too soft warmed up, unless you make a much drier dough. And there you have it, the best method to achieve the shreddiest of shreddy seitan. If you have any questions, then you can find me in the amazing Facebook group called the Seitan Appreciation Society. And if you enjoyed this recipe video, then please consider subscribing and clicking that bell icon for notifications, as more of my recipes will be recorded soon.